Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes with Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazines. We want to take advantage of this time for you to study and learn and grow as an artist. So we've put together a series of artist videos that you get to watch for free. Each day we're going to provide you with a video, and then we're going to provide you with an interview of the artist. All our gift to you so that you can grow and learn as an artist. Today, we're doing Bryan Mark Taylor's The Master's Mind. The reason we're doing that one first is this is a video that tells you how to grow as an artist, how to learn. He talks about the techniques for becoming a better painter and how you can grow and develop and make yourself better. So we're starting with that. So here is Bryan Mark Taylor and The Master's Mind.
So this is the first chunk that we're going to work on. And this one, like all the chunks that we're going to go through, these are things that can be practiced and should be practiced on a daily basis, as well as you want to do it in kind of a methodical sort of way, so that if you start working on composition and you want to improve composition, you need to consider doing it for a couple months straight. Often they say from the research, to establish that new habit, to wire the brain, and to get certain things, certain habits to stick, needs to be about 8 weeks of time. Of course, that depends on the activity, but things like composition, I would say it would be maybe even more. This is a lifetime pursuit, but an intense study of 8 weeks of time, you can learn a whole lot of compositional ideas just from that consistent practice. So that's what I'm recommending for all of these segments, is that you consider doing them consistently on a daily basis for a couple of months each. Okay, so the first idea that I want to show you is very simple. You can see that there will be a lot of variations built into it. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with this little example of how to think about composition. So first, I'm going to draw just 3 circles. And you can see they're evenly spaced, about the same size. And this is something that we kind of naturally do. We naturally want to have things kind of ordered and evenly spaced. We can do this without even thinking. And often we end up doing that. Things line up in our compositions. And these are things that we want to avoid. So what if we did this? You can see this is evenly spaced, but now we've shifted this one over so it's closer here than it is here. So that we've introduced a variety in the way we've spaced these objects. Now, when we think about this spacing, one of the things I mentioned in the lecture was this idea of using the golden section, or the golden section is a proportion where we find we're attracted to it. And in particular with people's faces and body proportions, the golden section is something that I think is important to study. And the ratio of the golden section is 0.618. So it's about a 60%, roughly 62% spacing. So this would be the 60%, and then this would be the 40% here. So that's the general idea, where you have a larger space and a smaller space. You can get much more specific if you want to. There are even artists that have golden section calipers to measure things out. And certainly the Renaissance artists and some of the artists of antiquity would really be specific on using the golden section. Now, for our purposes here and in general composition, as we're trying to learn how to dynamically space things, I think it's an easier way to just think about 1/3, 2/3. And that's the proportion of your mouth. So this part is 1/3 and this part's 2/3. And that's what gives it that placement, that nice placement right between the 1/3 and 2/3 range. So just thinking of it in those terms is just a way to simplify the process in your head. Okay, So here we've got the spacing. Now let's introduce variation in size. So we've got the spacing, and then we are going to make each one a little bit different size. So just by changing the size, this now becomes a little bit more interesting than these other compositions up here. Okay, what else can we do as far as introducing variation? Well, we can also change the shape. So this one goes this way. Now we've introduced another variation. Now the next one is value. We can deepen the value of one of them, maybe a gray tone, and leave that one white. So you can see we've started to introduce subtle variations in the design. And these are things that you can use on any aspect of your composition. Next one you could do is, you've got the shape change, you've got the value change, and now we can think of it in three-dimensional space. You lower one of them, one of the shapes is lower, this shape up here goes a little higher, and this one is somewhere in between. So now we see the variation there. Another variation could be we could overlap, like this shape here, and then this one can overlap slightly. So you can see just from this simple idea, starting here and moving or introducing a variation, things become more and more dynamic. So there's this variety, there's a majority and a minority of shapes. So I have a scene here. This is from a trip that I took up near the Wind Rivers in Wyoming. And just kind of a snapshot, big scene here. And there's a lot of interesting shapes and things going on in here. So when I look at this all this information that I've got, how can I make this interesting in terms of a space? So what I do when I'm composing, I use a square because all of the other rectangles and proportions are contained within this square, including the golden section. So I think it's a good idea. I use a square sketchbook out in the field so that I can always change all the different proportions. I'm going to start by dividing the space, maybe in an interesting way. So I'm not doing it obviously dead center. And this first line's quite easy, divide the space. But as we get going and add more complexity, we need to continue to think of this type of relationship with a large space and small space, so that every component is it has a dynamic spacing to it. Okay. We can always keep in mind, where half is. So we can keep in mind where half is, our center line is probably somewhere in here. So now what I'm going to do is introduce one of the shapes here. I'm looking at like this tree shape versus that tree shape. There's kind of an interesting relationship between the two. So I'm going to draw the one, and what I'm going to do first, there's a lot of complexity here and subtlety, but I want to use a series of straight lines. Because I want to think about shape first. It's important, though, that this doesn't feel like it's completely in the center. So I'm going to bring this out just a little bit so it feels slightly to this side. Okay, and I don't want this shape. Obviously, it's smaller than this one. I could even make it a little bit smaller so that it's a bit more dynamic here. Okay, and then we've got a little piece over here where I could place that maybe in this section right here. So you can see the spacing. We can get some variety here. Now this between here and here, here and there is similar. So what I'm going to do is maybe pull this object slightly this way, so that it closes this space slightly, opens this one up a little bit. So each one of these spaces are a little bit different. Again, our goal here is to space things dynamically. Now I'm going to, this shape here, move it slightly downward. So we're going to do, what we've discussed here. This one can be at a certain level. This one maybe a little bit higher. Okay, so that we've got some variety starting out. Now, let's look at this. We have this little patch right here. This is kind of interesting how this has been spaced. So how can we dynamically space that? This little sliver can come through here. So the space here and the spacing here is all different. And we've got this little piece of grass right in there. So we've got this long shape, this smaller shape here. So far we've got, and one thing, maybe this is getting close to that. So let's make this a little bit maybe longer, so it doesn't exactly equal that. Okay. All right, so now let's go up in the sky. We've got this element that we've introduced. There's something on this side that we can introduce, so that there's this kind of this balance. And we've got this cloud right here that we could introduce as a shape that kind of counterbalances. Okay. Now, we can also vary some angles here. So if, say, we were doing certain squares and they all had maybe the same angle, is not interesting, but if we have things that have various angles, that's more interesting than a row of things that have the same angle. Some repetition can be good, but too much repetition makes things uninteresting. Okay, even this part, this is a certain shape, this is a certain shape, and this one, all of these shapes need to be a little bit different. And maybe this one in the center needs to be a little bit broader, and this one on the side maybe a little bit smaller, just so that these have a dynamic spacing as well. All right, there's a spot here, and this kind of creates this interesting shape of the sky, and then there's this big cloud section here. So I'm going to work that into the composition. And that kind of passes through here. It's a little deeper tone. Okay, so we're introducing some value here. Okay, so these are the various shapes. Let's put value in each of the areas and see what we can come up with. So just to go over some of the basic tools, I'm just using a General's charcoal pencil, a 6B. I have a couple of different erasers. Like this is a Faber-Castell, and it's kind of a pencil type eraser. Here's another one. This is a Sanford eraser. Then I'm using pan pastel as well as a pastel drawing tool. And this is just a quick way to put in put in values and stuff like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and lay that in. This is this applicator is it's called Soft, so FFT. You can see you can get just dark values really quickly in your drawing. So one thing I'm going to do here is create the value pattern where each of these values are slightly, general areas are different than each of the other areas. And the reason why this is important is you want these areas to separate from one another even in the final stages of your painting, no matter how many nuances you put into it. So basically you're grouping certain values together because you want these shapes to separate from one another. If I start putting lots of highlights and stuff in any one of these shapes or dark accents, if you pepper them all around, then it's not going to read as a nice strong value pattern. So in a way, this is, laying this tone in is more like if you were painting, you would lay a tone like this in. Again, it's just a way to get to the solution faster. You can also do this with a charcoal pencil. Okay. One thing is there's some of these clouds that are kind of in this mid-tone range. They are nice to maybe break up that big light shape here. I'll introduce some of that here. And still thinking about all the spacing and stuff that's going on in this area. Now I'm going to just put a little bit of a tone on it. I could even use this to wipe it down a little bit. What I could do now is go in and redefine some of these areas. So what that did is soften some of the edges. One of the things I didn't mention here, but we could have some areas soft and some areas hard, and that creates more variety. All right, so I'm just redefining some of these areas just a bit more. And I'm going to get my eraser and work out some of these lights back out. So we've got this nice light area that sits behind this dark here. And really it's the contrast between the light and the dark here that'll create that focal area. So I'm gonna go back and kind of continue to rework some of these shapes. So this is something where it takes a little time to develop the right shapes, and there's a little bit of back and forth on developing something that is interesting, has variety to it, while still maintaining this value pattern. So it's not necessarily getting all the little details and stuff that's going to make this better. It is more about getting shapes to be working with each other, these value shapes. So like on this side, I'm going to lower that slightly and raise it up just a little bit on the other side. So in this case, I'm going to maybe divide this unequally here, where even in this little piece, there's a larger part, and then there's a smaller part. This is the smaller part here. This is, larger. So you can see how this divides. These ideas work on the big scale, and they go smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's one of the principles that we learn from dynamic spacing, and in particular golden section, is it relates on a big level, and the smaller parts relate on that larger scale. So that's what we're trying to build into a good design. And this is something that it's takes some time to get down. Just like if you were going to go out and play golf or any type of sport, there's lots of things to think about simultaneously. You want to work on all of these things so that they become automatic, things that you think about. So when you're putting strokes down, it may look like kind of total random, when you watch an artist that has done a lot of composition, where they're putting things, but a lot of this principle is underlying their thinking process. And what you want it to become is intuitive. You want it to get to the point where you don't have to think about it anymore. You can think about other things, more complex things. But that just it'll take a lot of chunking, a lot of practice to get to that point. Okay, I'm developing these clouds here that are coming across these shapes. So in this example, I'm not trying to do an incredibly finished drawing here. This is kind of more of a short exercise, but I want to keep going until I get a nice arrangement of shapes, and I've kind of fleshed out exactly what I want as far as my design goes. So I'll spend a little time, making sure that this is what I'm after. So the other thing you want to look at is, there's convex, concave, there's straight lines and curved lines, really. And this is all made up of straight and curved lines. Some of them, a line like this will make this shape concave, and that one convex. So you want to make sure and vary that up a little bit, where there's a series of convex, concave lines. See the ground plane here, deeper in value, then it should be deeper in value than this sky value up here. And this value of the sky, this thin cloud, since it's thinner, it's going to be slightly deeper in value. It's going to take on some of the character of the sky behind it. These clouds that are more dense right here, they become lighter. And of course, the trees, since they're an upright plane, they will receive less light, and they have a darker local value of the leaf color.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed that segment of The Master's Mind with Bryan Mark Taylor. I thought we'd get into his mind a little bit and share an interview. But before we do, if you're interested at all in that video, you can find it online at lilyartvideo.com. That's lilyartvideo.com. And now the interview.
So the reason why we call it The Master's Mind is because what we're doing is we're going inside the head of someone that has expertise. And I've used Rembrandt as an example, but it could be any number of experts in various fields, people that have done extraordinary things. And through the research that I've done, I've found that it doesn't matter what the field of expertise, there's a certain way the mind records and grows in response to certain types of training activities to achieve that level of mastery. And this kind of goes against some of the common myths and thoughts that we have about talent, and that people either have it or they don't. And what the research shows is that instead of looking at Mozart as just a genius that has something that none of us have, what they found in their research is that it doesn't matter who you are, you have to have around 10 years of intensive practice to achieve a level of kind of international mastery. So what this does is, I think, for the average person, is they can feel very empowered by the fact that the mind that they possess has the same kind of hardware and components as other people's minds. Now, certainly there are factors like early exposure, or a very good teacher, or kind of a social network that helps foster that talent. But if we realize that it's not just this magical ability that somebody is born with, but that it's something that can be tapped into, I think it gives a lot of people not only hope, but a real reason to go for it themselves. And so I think knowing this research is very empowering to artists of all types. So it's very much changed the way I view learning, the learning process. I used to have a much more scattered learning process. This is very much, in very tangible terms, helped me to not only in my own practices, but also in teaching, help people get from point A to point B. And I think what happens in a lot of art education is we get fed a lot of maybe emotional lectures and trying to inspire you that way to keep going, to be motivated, but in the end there's always these self-doubts. So what this does, the master's mind goes into a very detailed description of how the mind works to kind of cut away that emotional or feeling or insecurity about whether I can do this or not, and shows a systematic way of tackling, step by step, all the things that you need to do to achieve a level of mastery. So this approach is important because it can save years of time of kind of wandering around trying to figure out ways to improve one's craft. Basically, we've divided it into 6 components, 6 studies, and if the artist really works on these 6 areas, this is going to help them more than taking random classes, or even with teachers in various universities, where kind of the prevailing belief is that building up craftsmanship is not important anymore, which I don't buy into that idea. Those skill sets in any other field are important, and whether it's a doctor, lawyer, musician, so why not in fine arts? And so I've seen, as an educator myself, someone who has been a professor of art at a university, I've seen that there's some interesting counter currents that are trying to derail some of this classical understanding of painting and drawing and fine art in general. And really what I'm doing is showing that it's not how the mind works. The mind needs to have some concrete things to strive towards, because it's going to build the circuitry depending on how the exercises and things you do. You're literally programming your brain. So this aimless wandering that they encourage in some universities, in many universities, is counterintuitive to the way the mind works. So I'm bringing that that knowledge of these processes that have been used by Olympic athletes, some of the top musicians, but it really hasn't been applied to the field of art, fine art, visual art, painting. So that's where I feel like this is important for this field as well, field of expertise. So the pieces slowly came together as I have been teaching, as I've been reading. I'm fortunate to have two influences in my life that have helped me in this regard. One is my grandfather, who was a linguist. He had this great passion for learning languages and learned 7 languages and spoke them fluently, and then knew words from all kinds of other languages. He's the kind of guy that would sit down and read the dictionary and just be thrilled by it. And so even up until his 90s, he was constantly reading. His mind was very sharp, even to the end of his life. And so he was a great example, and that was carried on by my mother, created this kind of culture in our family where learning was one of the most important things we could do, this constant pursuit of learning. And so not only was I interested in learning new things, but also in the process of learning itself. How can we learn faster? And when I was a kid, my mother took me to a reading course to teach you how to speed read. And so they taught us how you, through this repeated practice, could read up to 1,000 words a minute. So things like that, early exposure kind of got me on this this kind of path to pursue learning and tapping into what the human mind's capable of. So how did I put this into into practice for myself? How has this helped me? So it's really changed the way I do practice, both outdoors in plein air painting as well as studio work. And that is the exercises that go before I do the actual painting. So one thing that I've realized through the research is that you can go through these plateaus. And the reason why you go through plateaus is you don't do exercises, really focused exercises to fix, issues or things you've neglected. And so now in my daily practice, it's very important to me to add specific exercises based on things that I need to work on, so that I combat this complacency and kind of this automatic response of how a painting needs to be created. Because it's really easy to get in that. You kind of chase your successes if you're not careful, and you kind of stagnate a bit. So now I do these practices like the drawing and in the key areas that I've shown in this project called the Master's Mind. That's a great question. It's something where intrinsic motivation is a rare commodity, and it's probably one of the most important things that we can have. It's somewhat difficult to motivate somebody on the outside, try and push them, and I found that that's in some ways impossible. But if you can, what is a technique called ignition, that's what you're trying to ignite in somebody, this passion to reach further. So I think if you can show, my goal is to show people their potential, show them that they have all the hardware inside their head to take it all the way to the top, the master's level. If you can show them that, I think that hope, that faith will help them make that commitment. I think people often give up because they don't feel like that what they do is going to make a difference. And what I'm here to show them is that it absolutely can. What do they do once they get this content? This is all about doing the exercises. And this is a daily practice that I'm advocating. And it doesn't have to be a long time every day, but it does have to be every day. And so we've kind of put the pieces together to help create the social environment, the intellectual environment, to be able to do those exercises every single day. That'll help the artist tap into the way their mind works, the way it grows, the plasticity that allows new things to be learned, even at advanced stages.
Bryan Mark Taylor is a rock star as far as I'm concerned, and I think the Master's Mind is a must for every artist. I hope you've enjoyed the segment and the interview. If you have interest in that video, you can find it at lilyartvideo.com. Lily, L-I-L-I.